Hi everyone, this is Calob Rundell of Father Dyer Church, and this is the first video on our Bible study in the Gospel of Luke. Today we're going to talk about Luke chapter 1 because this is the first day of December. There will be one of these videos for each chapter of Luke. The goal is by the time you are at Christmas Day, you will have read the entire Gospel of Luke. Because what better way to prepare for the arrival of Jesus, which is the entire point of Advent, than to know the story of Jesus? And so today we're going to talk about Luke chapter 1. These videos are not going to be as slick or produced as our Sunday morning videos because we have 24 of these to do, one each day. So it's just going to be me talking to you, sharing some notes on each chapter of Luke, and sharing some questions about what this means for our life. So when we start talking about the Gospel of Luke, just like any book of the Bible and any piece of literature or writing or art, really, that humanity has ever produced, we always want to ask some questions. So one of the questions we always want to ask is, who even made this? Who wrote this? Who drew this? Who made this song? In the case of the Gospel of Luke, we don't know who wrote the Gospel of Luke. Now, it's called Luke, and that is just some church tradition. Nowhere in the gospel, and nowhere in any gospel, does it say, I, Luke, wrote this book. If you go looking for it, you're not going to find it. That is just a tradition that got attached to this piece of work. We do know, however, that the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, that is a little ways down the road in the New Testament, were written by the same person, and that they're written as companion pieces. Because they're written in the same style, they use the same type of words, and they start the same. If you read the first 6 verses of Luke and you read the first 6 verses of Acts, they sound the same. And so that we know whoever wrote Luke wrote Acts. We know something interesting later on in the book of Acts, that in Acts chapter 16, in verses 6 through 12, the narration of that story changes from the second person or the third person to the first person, where the writer starts saying, we did this, we did that. And so we can gather from that narration and the use of the first person, where the writer says we, that whoever wrote Luke and Acts was a companion of the Apostle Paul. To get more about that, you got to read Acts chapter 16 to see that switch in the pronouns that are used. So we know whoever wrote it was around a few decades after the life of Jesus, and that they traveled with those first disciples, those first apostles in the book of Acts. So we don't know exactly who wrote it, but we have an idea of what their life may have been like. And then we always want to ask why. Why did someone write this book? Well, thankfully, the author of Luke tells us, and you can read that in verses 1 through 4, where the author says, I'm going to write this book so that these things get written down, that we've heard these stories, and the author kind of takes on an investigative role where like, I'm going to go investigate this, and we're going to write this story down so that we know what happened and what didn't happen. Now, there's an interesting word in here where the author says, this is who I'm writing this book for. And it says, this is written for you, most excellent Theophilus. Now, we also have no idea who this person was. So we know that Theophilus is a proper name, like it's a name you would have like Carl or whatever. And so this book is being written for or to someone, and that it says most excellent probably means it was someone of some nobility or some social standing. And that's all we know. Theophilus is a Greek word where it means lover of God, or someone who is beloved by God, or someone who loves God. Theo in Greek means God. Philo means to love in like a brotherly, familial kind of way. But other than that, we don't know who this is. So we know some things about this book. We don't know others. We know why it was written. We don't really know who wrote it, and we don't know really who it's written to. Okay. So that's kind of the foreground on the Gospel of Luke. Now we're going to get into talking about what actually happens in chapter 1. So in verses 5 through 26, there's this guy named Zechariah. And Zechariah is on in years, as is his wife Elizabeth, and a messenger from God, an angel, if you will, comes to Zechariah and says, guess what, bro? Your wife's going to be pregnant, and this child, you're going to call him John, and B, he's going to have this special gift and this special purpose from God. And Zechariah's response is a response probably most would have is be like, okay, but like, how's that going to happen? Because I'm kind of old, and, you know, my wife, Elizabeth, she's not exactly a spring chicken either. Some translation says on in years, so, you know, saying it politely. And the messenger, the angel's response is, well, guess what? It's going to happen whether you believe it or not. And because you kind of threw me some shade right now and you had questions about it, guess what? You don't get to talk anymore. Your talking privileges revoked. And so Zechariah goes mute. Okay? So that happens. And then immediately after that, a messenger comes to Mary, the mother of Jesus. Same message. Guess what? You're going to be pregnant. And Mary's response is the same as Zechariah's, meaning that Mary also asked, well, how is that going to take place? Because she has not exactly done the things that you need to do for one to be pregnant. Okay? Figure that out on your own, or ask your parents. Okay? And so Mary has the same response. And the angel says, it's just something God's going to do. And then Mary's response is, cool. Mary says, I will roll with that. Let what you say be done. Let it happen. Let it be. Okay? And then the story rolls on from there. So both Mary and Zechariah ask the same question of the messenger. How is this supposed to happen? Because, you know, I'm not normally the person who's going to get pregnant, but it's going to happen. And so they both ask the same question. And we learn from that, guess what? Asking questions of God is okay. Now, Zechariah goes mute, so make of that what you will. But Mary asks the same question and nothing happens to her. So ask questions of God. You know, the worst that will happen is you can't talk for a while. And honestly, in today's world, that would probably do us all some good if we would just stop talking for a while. Most of us talk way too much as it is. Okay. So Mary finds out she's pregnant. Or that she's going to become pregnant, however it works. She goes to see Elizabeth, you know, her cousin. This is all connected. This is all kind of in one giant extended family. And Elizabeth has this experience where John the Baptist, still in utero, like jumps at joy because it somehow detects, you know, that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is there. Make of that whatever you will. And then Elizabeth says, Mary, this baby you're going to have is going to be special and do amazing things. And somehow my baby knows that. Again, this is miracles we're talking about. And then in verses 46 through 55, Mary's response is what's called the Magnificat, where Mary has this poem or maybe a song where she gives praise to God for these things that God has done. And I want to encourage you, when you're reading this in chapter 1, pay especially attention to this. You know, obviously pay attention to all of it, but really read slowly and intentionally Mary's Magnificat in 46 through 55. Because Mary says some powerful and maybe a little revolutionary things about who God is and what God does and how God operates. So pay attention to what Mary says here and sit with that and see if you have a reaction to it. Because some of those words may hit home for some of us, and we need to sit with that. Okay, so pay special attention to Mary's Magnificat as you're reading Luke chapter 1. Okay, so then it comes time for John to be born, and he's born. It's time for him to be named. And the people that are there taking care of this ritual are like, what should we name him? And they say John, and they're like, well, why would we name him that no one in your family has that name? So the name John, and this is a very common name in our world. My best friend's name is John. Lots of you are probably named John or know someone who is named John. John is a Hebrew name. You can find it in the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testament a couple places. And it's short for the longer name Yohanan or Yohanan. And I don't speak Hebrew, so if you do, pardon my pronunciation. Okay, but the full name of that, the Yohanan or the Yohanan, is that God is gracious, or God has shown grace. And so if you know someone named John, that's the root name of their word, that it's Hebrew and it's a shortened form of God is gracious, or God has shown grace to this person. And John gets that name because in this instance where Elizabeth is on in years, as is Zechariah, and they have a child, God has shown some grace. God has shown some favor to them in having that child. Okay. Then in 67 through 79, Zechariah has his own poem or his own song after he's been unmuted. And he uses that opportunity to praise God and to also say to those present, here's what this child is going to do. Here's what this John is going to be about. He's going to do these great things and prepare the way for something even more special that God is going to do. And then Luke chapter 1 concludes with verse 80, where John grows up and goes into the wilderness. Now, later on in Luke chapter 4, we're going to read about Jesus in the wilderness. And what happens here for both John and Jesus is that the wilderness is a time and a place of intentional preparation. That John goes into the wilderness so that he can ready himself for what God will have him do when the right time comes. It's a place where he can center himself and be centered on who God is and what God is calling him to do. And each and every one of us needs that time where we can connect with God and connect with ourselves to prepare us for what is to come. And this Advent season is all about that. It's all about preparation. It's to prepare us for the arrival of Jesus. And here's the thing. If John the Baptist needed time to prepare, if Jesus needs time to prepare, you and I need time to prepare as well for what God is doing and how we can be a part of that. So I hope you've enjoyed reading Luke chapter 1, and I want to leave you with a question to think about. So in this chapter, we've read about God interacting with people, and we've seen how people respond to that. So the question I have for us is, how do we respond when God is doing something? Either God is doing something in us or around us or through us or somewhere, somehow, we sense, we get the message that God is doing something. How do you respond to that? How do I respond to that? How do we respond to that? Because we can respond to it however we want. The response is up to us. We're agents. We have free will. That's a gift from God. We can respond to God however we want. But how do we? So I want to invite you to just think about that question and what that answer looks like in your life. Maybe there's not an answer, and that's okay too. But just something for you to think about from Luke chapter 1. How do we respond to what God is doing in our lives, in our communities, and in our world? Thank you for watching this first video. We'll have one every day through Christmas Eve for each chapter of Luke. If you have any questions about Luke chapter 1 or any part of Luke as we're going through, please email me your questions. It's Calob@FatherDyer.com. Honestly, I love talking about the Bible. I love when people send me questions about the Bible. I cannot guarantee you answers because guess what? I don't know everything. I don't know a lot of things. And it's a big, complicated book, but maybe there are answers to some questions. Maybe there's more questions to ask that we can ask together. But if you got questions about something, whatever it is about the Gospel of Luke, send them to me. Calob@FatherDyer.com. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great day and see you tomorrow for Luke chapter 2. Peace.